Creativity has always been an intrinsic part of the human being. The earliest people expressed themselves through cave paintings. There is a basic instinct for people to express themselves creatively. In remote parts of New Guinea, we can get an extraordinary glimpse of ourselves as we lived thousands of years ago. These people, like our early ancestors, not only survive in their environment, they solve problems and create works of art stimulated by the world around them. Human ingenuity led to the development of tools, weapons, shelters, and ways to travel. We'll never know the creators of many milestone inventions, nor precisely when they occurred. For example, planting crops began a new era for humanity. It elevated the human from a food gatherer to a food producer. People had to devise ways to keep animals from destroying crops. One advantage the producers have over the gatherers is that they can plan for future growth and ensure having a surplus. This surplus released time and energy to do other things that over the ages led to cities and civilization. Hello, I'm Sam Nicholas. When I was a kid, I loved to draw and paint. I still do, just like the person that made this tribal mask in New Guinea. As an industrial designer, I know that combining art and engineering is important to developing beautiful products. Long before the industrial design profession began, primitive societies were shaping tools and weapons for functional uses. Then they would decorate them for artistic or spiritual purposes. This indicates a human need to combine art with technology. In both traveling around the world and having a career as a professor, I have come in contact with many creative people. The fascination of creativity led me to pursue the subject extensively. I feel creativity is an important part of our intelligence. It is unique to human beings, and it should be nourished. A good way to do this is through creative problem-solving experiences. Our creative skills can be developed to help prepare us for unknown problems and situations that we will surely face. Creativity, a familiar word to all of us, yet one difficult to describe. The creative process has a result. This can be a new product, medical technique, invention, musical composition, poem, or any number of developments that often affect the way we live. Some people simply say, creativity means getting the job done. In this program, we'll see some results of creative thinking and problem solving. Some of these are simple, everyday things that we often take for granted. Hopefully, we will have a better appreciation for the people whose imaginations brought them into being. Some pioneers who faced fantastic challenges will tell us how they were able to apply their creativity and find success. We will also learn something about the creative problem-solving process and a creative problem-solving competition called Odyssey of the Mind. Hopefully you will appreciate your own creative nature and be inspired to apply it. First, let's pay tribute to one of the most creative people of all time, the 15th century genius, Leonardo da Vinci. Many people are familiar with Leonardo as an artist. His attention to detail and knowledge of anatomy resulted in a beauty that is timeless. However, he was also a philosopher, scientist, musician, engineer, and inventor. Leonardo's many achievements still inspire us. It was Leonardo's ability to see the world around him, combined with his insatiable curiosity, that unleashed his creativity. This led to numerous scientific investigations and inventions. As new generations are exposed to his creative genius, They too are inspired to see the world around them and its potential. As Leonardo said, we must know how to see. His entire life was spent in search of learning and knowledge. He said, learning is the only thing the mind never exhausts, never fears, and never regrets. One subject that he worked on for years was human flight. He made sketches of various types of flying machines. Leonardo believed that the bat provided the model for human-powered flight. He studied movement and the forces of gravity, believing that a person could stay aloft with flapping wings. However, he could not fulfill his dream. Like Leonardo, we marvel at the variety and grace of birds. Mostly, we envy their ability to fly. Since the days of Leonardo, many people have tried to fly. Some attempts were reckless, often ending in disaster. Others were, well, take a look and you decide.
These might be called the Wrong Brothers.
For many, many years, man has tried to emulate the bird. At first, he proceeded cautiously. Then he began to take chances. Tirelessly, ingeniously, courageously, and with great determination, he carried on. This, obviously, is one of man's first attempts to get off the ground in an early type helicopter. How high would he fly? So, let's see. However, my friends, those of you who are scientifically air-minded can work out your own theories. And good luck to you. And you. And you. You will have to work out your own theories as to just what happened and why. Well, good luck, mister. I gotta go.
Would human beings ever fly using their own power? Henry Kramer, a British industrialist, offered £50,000 to the first person to fly a half-mile figure-8 pattern and be 10 feet high at the finish. A friend of mine, Dr. Paul McCready, accepted the challenge. He designed the aircraft and eventually won the prize. The pedal-driven plane was named the Gossamer Condor. Kramer then offered another prize to the first person to fly across the English Channel using his or her own power. Dr. McCready's Gossamer Albatross won this prize. Some of his planes are now in the Smithsonian's Aerospace Museum next to the Wright brothers' Kitty Hawk and Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis. I spoke with Paul about his achievements and his thoughts on creativity. In trying to help people become more creative, you might say that we're using creativity to develop creativity. And Henry Kramer posed a problem and a financial reward for the first person to fly under their own power. How did that have an impact on your life?
What Kramer did is almost considered a classic case of using a prize to get something to happen. Here was this very impractical subject, human-powered flight, that maybe it was man's oldest aviation dream, but once people began using engines and achieving all sorts of things, nobody cared much about human-powered flight. And here Henry Kramer put up this prize, a big prize, and once he did, nobody was forcing him to do it. Once he did, he assured that human-powered flight would be achieved, this old goal would be achieved. And he was the one who was really creative. But anyhow, a lot of people tried, did some short flights, then we finally did the Gossamer Condor, and it did unleash a lot of things in my life because it turned out to be much more visible, highly visible, and more interesting to a lot of people than we'd ever expected. So it ended up in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. So yeah, it's changed my life a lot for the better. It really got started with me because I had a debt about $100,000, and it turned out that was just about the size of the Kramer Prize, and that was the stimulus. I thought, oh boy, maybe this could help with the debt. And now that I see so many wonderful things having happened, I'm glad that I had that debt, because otherwise I never would have gotten started in this.
When you worked on the Gossamer Condor, obviously there were times when things went wrong. You may have had crashes and what have you. Did you ever think about quitting?
No. You have the confidence that you'll reach the goal. So if something breaks, it's an annoyance, but it doesn't stop you because you know you're going to get there. So we had confidence and just kept improving till finally the prize was won. But we knew we were going to get there. And this business of confidence is a very important part of creativity. I think your point about confidence is well taken. I think a lot of times kids have a confidence. Little kids will accept a challenge, maybe because they don't know they can't do something, so they turn around and do it. A lot of times older people tend to feel they have to have a background in order to do something creative. Maybe it's an excuse not to attempt something. But you had little background as an aeronautical engineer in airplane construction, as I understand it. Did you find that a help or a hindrance in working on the Gossamer Condor? You have to put all these things in perspective. Sometimes it's good to have some wide-eyed innocence. Sometimes it's good to have a lot of good professional capability in that subject. If somebody's going to operate on a brain tumor with me, I don't want them just to be bright and innovative. I want them to have a lot of good medical training and lots of practice. But in pioneering some new subject, sometimes if you have too much knowledge of what didn't work in the past and why it can't work, then you just don't accomplish as much. And I was lucky I had good background in aerodynamics, but no background in aircraft structures, and it was much easier for me to come up with an extremely different method of construction that let you make a very light and very large airplane, which was a very good way to tack this particular task. What you want most of all is, if the person has good professional capabilities, also somehow have him or her have the open-mindedness that a 10-year-old child has to look at all different problems in a very creative way.
Looking back, you might say that you could have maybe broke the rules in a way. You didn't have a mindset that may have put some limitations that really weren't important to the project.
You should use appropriate technology for whatever challenge you're doing, and in our case, we were able to use very simple things, and lightness was extremely important. And yeah, you didn't have to fly high or fast, so nobody would get hurt if it broke. So you'd make it spindly, almost ready to break, and the only way you knew that you had the absolute minimum weight was if it would break occasionally. If it never broke, it was obviously overweight. If it always broke, of course, you couldn't fulfill your mission. If it broke about every 25th flight, that was just right, and that's the way we designed it. And then whenever it broke and you repaired that part before you flew it again, made it a little heavier, if there were some parts that hadn't broken ever, you replaced some of them with lighter parts because they were obviously overstrength. Now, that's not the way to make an ordinary airplane, but it was very good for this particular vehicle.
Your Flying Pterodactyl was the first airplane made that flew by flapping its wings and flew backwards.
Our flying replica is to be a featured actor in a widescreen IMAX film called On the Wing, which shows the evolution of natural flight, of which this is the biggest example, and evolution of man's flight, and this would be shown as an example of aerospace technology towards the end of the film. So it had to be done for film, it had to be done a certain length of replica, a certain length of time, a certain budget, and that put some big pressures on it. But we did have the role model of nature to go by. After all, nature for a couple 100 million years has been operating flying creatures very effectively, so one knew it could be done, but it's not easy. The special challenge with the pterodactyl was to keep it stable, whether it was flapping or not, just keep it stable, because it has no tail and has a huge head stuck out way in front. And you have to use active control, sort of the latest aerospace technology, sensors, sophisticated autopilot, a lot of motors serving as muscles and making the head move back and forth, and the fingers come out and so on. You do all that, and you finally can make it work. This creature that we made was only 18-foot span. It was a temperamental, overweight adolescent size, but the kid turned out to be magnificent.
One time you told me that you were improving on nature at about 1 million years a week.
Yeah, well, we, using humans' brain and technology, you can do things much faster than nature. Nature develops things, things evolve by evolution, by selection of slight improvements that result from random variation. And nature does it very slowly, but very effectively. Nature never makes a mistake. Whatever works fine. And so nature is a fantastic designer, not by design, but by selection. And humans can do a pretty good job, better in some ways. You know, airplanes do much more than birds do, because we have huge power and different materials to work with. But nature does some amazing things with its flying creatures. The sooty tern will fly 4 years on one flight, from one takeoff until the landing. It'll snatch stuff out of the water, fish and squid, but man hasn't been able to do anything like that. The monarch butterfly, some of the subspecies, migrate 2,000 miles from Canada to a particular grove of trees near Mexico City. All that information just contained in the DNA that essentially comprises their brain, their instinct. And humans are not going to equal that kind of technology. Nature's pretty good, but human technology is pretty good too.
Another of Dr. McCready's creations was just as magnificent, the Solar Challenger. This solar-powered aircraft flew nearly 200 miles and reached an altitude of 11,500 feet. What do you think is the most important step in the creative problem-solving process?
Something I associate with creativity that's absolutely most important is asking the right question. Look at your problem from all different angles, and very often redefining the goal is an important part of it. First, really understanding the goal is important, and we're not very good at understanding what we're driving at lots of times. If you get so you can verbalize the goal, actually tell somebody clearly what it is, and that is absolutely the underlying goal, then you can circle around it in all different directions and maybe come up with a good answer.
When speaking with Paul, his concern for reducing pollution becomes quite apparent. He has devoted a great deal of time and energy on projects designed to protect our environment. One such project was the development of the Sun Racer, a solar-powered automobile. It won the World Solar Challenge, a race nearly 2,000 miles across the continent of Australia. The project was developed by General Motors, Hughes Aircraft, and Dr. McCready's company, AeroVironment. The Sun Racer's speed exceeded 60 miles per hour. It crossed Australia averaging 42 miles per hour on a 2-horsepower motor. When the Sun Racer crossed the finish line, it was 623 miles and 2.5 days ahead of the second-place car. The last-place car was 1,500 miles and 1 month behind. The Sun Racer shows the world that efficient cars using alternative energy sources are possible.
When it comes to the environment, really asking the question or setting the goal of what we're trying to do, that is most important. If we decided as a state, as a nation, as a world, that we were going to have a sustainable, desirable, globe in 50 years, we could achieve it. But we'd have to set the goal, get everybody to go along with it. Now we are beginning to recognize it, and we have to come up with a lot of very creative ways of solving those problems. And I think the problems are so big that I almost despair of adults solving them, because it's obvious adults aren't solving them very well. And that's why I really like to spend time with youngsters who are in elementary school and secondary school and get them thinking openly, asking any question, arguing, trying to come up with answers, not just automatically believing in authority or trying to get the answer that's in the back of the book. Working in teams, thinking about the future, just developing thinking skills in general, of which creativity is one important part.
How would you define creativity?
Well, a lot of different ways, and my way is getting the job done.
For his engineering achievements, Dr. McCready was voted the Engineer of the Century by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. The fascination with flight motivated a lot of people to develop kites, hot air balloons, and a myriad of fuel-driven aircraft. By becoming aware of the creative process and appreciating the thinking and doing of others, perhaps your creative spirit can be stimulated. A unique group of paratroopers demonstrate their creativity in a different way. Through creative choreography, they have elevated the common parachute jump to a higher level experience. These paratroopers are perhaps the finest in the world. They are the United States Army's Golden Knights. Their elaborate maneuvers and pinpoint accuracy are a sight to behold. After jumping from a plane several miles high, they circle gracefully for miles and land on a target smaller than a bath towel.
The next jumper. On the target, stopping all before momentum. Beautiful tiptoe, gets in a landing. Brings it straight down, stopping all before momentum. He too stands up. Oh, yeah.
These performances have amazed millions of people over the years. During this descent, the Golden Knights passed this baton to each other in midair. President John F. Kennedy inspired a nation by giving America its greatest engineering challenge.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
The number of problems to overcome was staggering. Many were obvious, such as developing new fuels, life support systems, and computer programs.
Roger, that's firm.
Others were less known, like non-destructive testing and developing chemicals to keep face shields from fogging during re-entry. Not only solving problems, but identifying new problems became a way of life. Often by solving one problem, others were created. Through teamwork, NASA was able to solve problems, land astronauts on the moon, and bring them home.
Got a checklist handy, Scope?
Our space program has led to developments in microelectronics that have changed our lives. Today, space flights are common. Not only do we send satellites into space, we maintain them and sometimes bring them back to Earth. Never before has our creativity been challenged on such a grand scale. Most developments in our history weren't very dramatic, but continue to be part of our daily lives. We often overlook the creative ideas that resulted in the simple, everyday things that make living easier. We hardly give a second thought to many great ideas, such as keys and locks. Mousetraps. We'll see other uses for mousetraps later in the program. I think one of the greatest designs is the needle. It would be a fantastic challenge to try to improve it. It's beautiful, functional, and uses a minimal amount of material. Zippers. Most of us have some clothes with zippers. How many understand how a zipper works? Imagine the creativity of thinking of a zipper for the first time. There are numerous reasons people are creative. Some create for money. Others do so as part of their occupation, and yet others like creative problem solving for personal reward. There are times we create in order to survive. Some of the most visible and inspirational examples of the creative process are found in the entertainment industry. To me, the greatest example of creativity in the private sector is Disney World. The Magic Kingdom seems to be just that, a magic kingdom bringing enjoyment to people of all ages. My favorites are Fantasyland and the parades. Here, the cartoon characters that I loved as a child come to life. Disney's Imagineers combine creativity in art and engineering that are both innovative and entertaining. The creativity around us while visiting the Disney parks is inspirational. Disney World is an architectural masterpiece. The elaborate buildings are beautiful down to the slightest detail. In Epcot Center, we can learn about other cultures, the oceans, and the world around us in a fun-filled environment. The new MGM Park at Disney World provides us with an exciting adventure into the making of motion pictures. Walt Disney's pioneering spirit has brought more enjoyment and education to more people, perhaps than anyone else. Throughout history, storytelling has been an important part of our culture. Through novels, movies, and television programs, more people are exposed to stories than ever before. Many of these stories contain humor. Humor is important to creative people in particular. This application of creativity to entertainment remains a very important part of our lives. The creativity of the early astronomers was remarkable. Using the stars, the adventurous Vikings navigated the seas. Imagine the challenges they faced. Aids to navigation have progressed steadily throughout history. From sextants, buoys, lighthouses, and radar, to our modern use of satellites, we can precisely determine our location anywhere in the world.
Come back to it.
Isn't it ironic? One of the greatest challenges of the 20th century was to reject all of these aids to long-distance sailing. Some people select occupations, take up sports, do community service work that really interest them. Some people like to play golf. They play golf, they develop a certain amount of skill, and then they move on to more challenging golf courses. Some people like to climb mountains. They climb a mountain, and then they move to more difficult and challenging mountains. A lot of people like to go boating. They start on lakes, on small boats, and then move up to bays and even the open ocean. A few people have even tried to cross an ocean on a small boat. A friend of mine, Marv Kramer, did just that. On a boat about this size, he crossed the ocean a number of times. And then he went on the ultimate sailing adventure, to sail around the world without instruments. His early fascination with the stars led to a love of navigation.
I was especially interested in the Vikings who sailed before Columbus and without a compass. And then later on, after I was out of high school, I read an article by Jack Hanna who said if you had $1,000 to buy the material, you could build your own boat and sail it around the world. And the boat that he proposed was a double-ender 30-footer. And ultimately, I bought a 30-footer, fiberglass, a material that was unheard of when I first read the article, and sailed it across the Atlantic 6 times.
What was your inspiration for making a trip like that, sailing around the world, especially without instruments?
Well, it was the end result of a long process, but all started in the Atlantic in 1974. Ed Twardowski and I were returning from the Azores, double-handing, and a hurricane had roughed the water up, and the rough water hit the rudder and ruined our self-steering. So now we have to spend 12 hours a day at the tiller, and we weren't out very long before the compass light started to fail. Well, there wasn't a whole lot of time to fix compass lights when you think of cooking, dishwashing, record-keeping, sight-taking, and all of that. So finally I said to Ed, Ed, we're going to sail without the compass light at night. Just put the North Star over that stanchion right there and hold it there for your tour of duty. So when we got our noon position, it was very little different from what it would have been if we'd been using the compass all night. Well, that started the wheels to turn. You see, it might have been 2 or 3 days before, or 2 or 3 nights before I got to thinking about it. And what came to my mind was, look, if we can find direction at night without a compass, could we find direction in the daytime? Well, that did it right there, because by the time I got back from Cape May, I'd figured out that we could use waves and long-distance swells for direction, and I'd already started on a way of finding latitude. So it really started in the middle of the Atlantic with compass light failure.
Henry Ford said that when things go wrong, they're opportunities rather than problems. In a sense, that's what you did.
Some of your most creative moments are a result of being faced with a problem.
Marv, how old were you when you made this trip?
I was just 1 month short of 67.
How large was the Globe Star?
Globe Star was 36 feet. That's the length, and the beam was about 11.5 feet. And it extended into the water about 5 feet.
Let's talk about planning your trip. There was no book on how to sail around the world without instruments. You had to pay really close attention to details.
There's so many things, and it can be as little as a very tiny cotter pin in a turnbuckle that isn't in properly. Everything has to be checked and double-checked. Spares have to be put on board. You have to select a boat that you feel is equal to the occasion. Southern oceans are a pretty rough place, and they're going to rough up the average boat out of a factory. So that you have to select a boat that's going to do the job.
What about supplies? Food, water?
Food was our safety net. See, there was a possibility that we would miss a continent and go right by. Then we'd have to sail across a pretty wide ocean to get to the next continent. So if we had enough food to do it, it was no problem at all. So we carried cases and cases of canned food and almost barrels of flour, that kind of thing. Fresh bread, by the way, we made every second or third day on board, which is a great staple to have. We carried a big 5-gallon bucket of medicines gotten ready for me by doctors at the Underwood Hospital in Woodbury. We had quite a variety, painkillers in tablet form, injectable form. We had scalpels in case we had to do minor operations. We had splints and the like.
You left New Jersey in December. Why then?
I had figured that we ought to be off by the middle of December, and I kept postponing it when the boat wasn't ready. We were taking a little bit of a chance leaving that time of the year. But when I looked at the charts and found that the weather that we would experience in the vicinity of Cape Horn was worse than anything off the Jersey coast in December, the reason that I felt we had to be at Cape Horn a year later in December, within a week of the solstice, which is the 22nd, a week either way, before or after, was that it was a way of finding our way around the Horn in complete overcast. I had been warned by oceanographers who knew the area that I couldn't depend on using the stars there because I might see them only one night a month. And just knowing that we were in the vicinity of the Horn at that time of the year, and knowing that it didn't get completely dark, gave us the information that we were far enough south to clear the Horn.
First leg was 100 days long. It took us from Cape May, New Jersey, across the Atlantic, south and eastward to the Cape Verde Islands, then southward in the Atlantic to the latitude of Cape Town, and then across to Cape Town, South Africa. From there, we went across the Indian Ocean, a little southward out of Cape Town, then down to the latitude of southern Australia, made a short leg northward to check our position, and then went southeastward into Tasmania and up to Hobart. That was a leg of 74 days. From there, we went northward to Sydney, Australia, trip of about 10 days. And then from Sydney, we went across the Tasman Sea, north of the North Island of New Zealand, and made a landfall on the northeast corner of the North Island. From there, that was a trip of about 14 days. From there, we went across the Pacific. Took us 49 days to get to Cape Horn. And after we rounded Cape Horn, we saw some rocks and came into the Falkland Islands. And from the Falkland Islands, we paralleled the South American coast till we got to the Bulge of Brazil, then shot northwestward back to the latitude of Cape May. Had a little bit of struggle getting out of the Gulf Stream, but got back to Cape May in a trip that took us 98 days.
Let's talk about Cape Horn. Was that where you anticipated the most danger?
It's really where we expected it. I didn't want to leave without a backup method. Our twilight method was okay, but I wanted a backup method. Well, I've been reading in the Ocean Passages for the World. This is a British Admiralty publication that tells you about the various ocean passages and how long they take and what you do en route. And they advised in rounding the Horn to stay in very close to the Horn in order to avoid the ice farther south. But the idea was that if you could sail across from New Zealand, get a hint through watercolor, bird life, or even distant snow-covered mountains that you were approaching South America, you could make a right-hand turn, go down to the floe ice that surrounds Antarctica, then make a left just as you got to it, and you could go through Drake Passage and get around Cape Horn. You see, the whole strait is about 300 miles wide, but the northern 100 miles is clear of ice. The southern 200 miles has ice flow. So if you could go down to the ice and make a left, you'd be sure of getting around Cape Horn safely.
The book said, stay away from the ice flow, but you said, I have to get near the ice flow. So you looked at that book from a different point of view.
Use it as information.
Tell us about circumnavigation without instruments. What else did you use beside the stars?
We had to find direction, and that was off the waves, or the wind itself acted as a steering guide, because as long as the wind held steady, then we could use that as a direction reference. Now, if the wind shifted, the wind shift would have to be expressed on the water in some way. The waves would start to turn from one direction to another. There were times when we used watercolor to judge longitude. For example, when you get near a continent, the blue of the open sea turns to a kind of green. And I had checked out with an old ship captain who had been around the Horn a few times, and he said that the water of the Pacific was a light green, and the water of the Atlantic in Falklands Current was a dark green. So that when we got to that place in our circumnavigation, we could tell from watercolor about what our longitude was. Well, then there were other things that gave us clues. For example, on our way up from the Falklands, there were Jaegers out at sea. Well, Jaegers are found only in the deep ocean. I don't mean deep in the deep water sense, but far away from land. On the other hand, if you see terns, they're shorebirds for the most part. So you can tell by the bird life whether you're getting close to land. Going into the Falklands, a long row of white cumulus clouds developed in very cold air. Well, cumulus clouds wouldn't develop in cold air unless there were high mountains involved. Well, that was a tip-off to the mountains of southern Falklands, and they guided us right into the southern Falklands. No problem at all. Now, one time we got direction by the squeak of the hatch, which sounds ridiculous when I tell it, but it all worked out very, very logically. The hatch cover had slid into the cockpit. The stops at the far end were made of teak, and teak splits very easily. So the teak split and the hatch cover came out into the cockpit. Well, if we lost that hatch cover, it would have been serious because there's only a certain amount of water that you can tolerate in cold climates. Well, when we got to Cape Town, I replaced that teak with plywood, and it was a very coarse plywood, and the end grains of the plywood dug down into the stainless steel runners that the hatch slid on and made a horrible squeak when the air was dry. Never thought about it at all until we were going across the Pacific. And the sky got cloudy, which wasn't any big deal because the wind was still blowing and we got direction off the wind, but then the wind stopped. Well, that's no big deal either because without wind you're not going to sail, and if you're not going to sail you don't need direction. So here we are sitting on an ocean that is calm and with, you know, calm air and a calm sea. Well, the sea got so flat that there was no visible direction to it at all. You couldn't pick out waves, you couldn't pick out swells or anything. But then the wind began to blow. All right, now here you are sitting in the middle of an ocean and you want to go home. That's the whole object, is to get back from where you started. And there was good wind to do it, ideal wind, but no direction. Sky was still cloudy. So what do? Well, I sat in my bunk down below, and one of the crew pushed the hatch forward to come down, and the hatch set up this horrible screech, much like your fingernails coming down a blackboard, only much more intense. Really ear-splitting kind of thing. So, boy, it was like a light bulb went off inside of my head. Hey, fellas, we got direction. Put her on the starboard tack, we're all set. Well, all that happened in an instant, but the rationale was that if the air had been coming from the equator, from the north in the southern hemisphere, it would have carried moisture with it and would have wet the plywood and lubricated the sliding joint, and there would have been no squeak at all. But inasmuch as the air was coming off Antarctica and was very dry, therefore, coming off the cold ice, it dried out the plywood and made it squeak on the hatch runners. So we got direction out of a squeak of the hatch and got about a day and a half of sailing before the sky cleared enough to give us direction in the sky. And when we got our direction, we were very close to being on the money.
Yeah, that was creative problem solving at its best.
Fun thing to do, too.
Where did you study navigation?
On the dining room table, as far as I know.
Do you feel that not having a course in navigation helped you?
Yes, very definitely. Because, see, I wasn't restricted in my thinking the way a navigator would be restricted. They have sort of dress rules, you know, and adhere to them, and they fall into that pattern.
How about the value of competition in sailing? For example, the America's Cup.
I think the value of the competition is what happens before the sailing begins. The research that goes into it, the attempt to make the boats faster, to develop new materials that will make the boats lighter and stronger. Yes, I think there's a lot of value in that.
So you would agree with me that competition stimulates creativity?
I think so, yes.
Is there any advice you would give to our young people about exploring their own creativity?
There is an expression that was used a few years, or started at least a few years back, and that was go for it. My recommendation would be, if you have an idea or a dream, hang on to it. In my case, the dream came at 18, and I was 3 times 18 when I really got off my butt and started to do something about it, buying a boat that would go across the ocean. But I would say don't wait that long. Keep your dream alive, but pursue it before you get to old age.
A broken compass light led to the challenge of sailing around the world without instruments. Marv's observation of the stars, winds, waves, and wildlife led him to achieve a lifelong dream. He is an excellent example of what Leonardo da Vinci meant when he said, "We must know how to see." Inspiration for creative thinking comes from a wide variety of sources. Museums are great motivators. Russia's Hermitage Museum in Petersburg, the British Museum in London, the Louvre in Paris, and the Smithsonian in Washington house millions of creative treasures from around the world, as do many museums. The range of simple tools to complex space stations illustrates how far our imaginations have taken us. Viewing these treasures helps to inspire us to think creatively. Our thoughts build on the creations of those who went before us. The fact that these museums exist shows that we value creative accomplishments. Perhaps in your hometown there's some type of museum. Have you been there recently? As an experiment, visit a museum near you. When you enter a room that would normally take a few minutes to go through, stay an hour or more. Imagine what Leonardo da Vinci would see. Nature may have been the inspiration for a number of ideas that led to inventions and engineering achievements. There's a lot of nature out there. Maybe it can inspire you to think of something. You can find creative stimulation everywhere. Hardware stores, department stores, supermarkets, and sporting goods stores. I've always been fascinated by car washes. Some even put windows in where you could watch physics in action. A car wash is an assembly line of inventions, a Rube Goldberg type place with a very specific purpose. Being in this lab where I taught design brings back a lot of memories. This brings back a lot of memories too. When I was young, we had fly paper, a sticky, unsightly paper that flies stuck to. In trying to improve our control over flies, the problem wasn't to design a new fly paper. The real problem was, how can we get rid of flies? This allowed us to think of fly swatters, bug sprays, and bug lights. If you were given a problem to make an egg stand on end, how would you do it? Problems oftentimes have limitations. In classrooms, students may be assigned term papers or reports. Limitations may be the length of the paper and that it must be typed. Other problems may have limitations that include safety requirements, building codes, cost limits, maintenance considerations, time requirements, corporate image, and a host of others. Let's go back to our friend the egg. The problem was to make the egg stand on end. Keeping the egg unbroken was a self-imposed limitation. The way the problem was stated, it was okay to break the egg. If a drive belt breaks on a machine, what is the problem? To replace the belt? Perhaps superficially, but let's think about it. Sometimes when we think we solve a problem, we cure the symptoms and not the disease. Of course we need to replace the belt, but the real problem may be to find out why it broke in the first place and then correct that situation. After stating a problem, we may also give limitations that we must work within. Next, we need ideas. The more, the better. Be sure not to evaluate your ideas at this point. That will come later. Getting back to the drive belt, we should first state our problem. What are different reasons that can cause a belt to break? In this case, we will not put any limitations on the problem. Next, try to get ideas. After generating a lot of ideas to choose from, begin to evaluate them. The more ideas you have to start with, the better your chances are of getting a good solution. Last, try your ideas out. This method is a good one, and I often use it. Correctly state your problem, give any necessary limitations, generate as many ideas as possible, evaluate your ideas, try out your ideas, or apply your solution. It's important to remember that better ideas usually come later. Don't settle for the first solution that comes along. Don't give up too soon. Some problems take a long time to solve. Dr. McCready's Gossamer Condor crashed many times in its development. Constantly revise ideas and improve them in the process. When developing an idea, some mistakes will be made. That's part of the creative process. No one wants to make mistakes, but when we do, we should try to learn from them. I believe that people can learn to be creative. If we can learn it, we can teach it. Creative thinking is a skill, and like any other skill, it can be honed. By using divergent problems, or those with many solutions, we can encourage creative development. Most of our educational system is built on convergent problems, or those with one correct answer. We certainly need these to learn such things as math calculations, formulas, correct use of grammar, and rules for driving. By also providing open-ended questions, we will expand our students' thinking skills. We all have creative talents. Some have more than others. Some have the opportunity to develop and express them. Youngsters have enormous amounts of creativity. Many times they get into school and are continuously faced with right or wrong answers that tend to dampen their creativity. When I was teaching industrial design, I asked my students to solve divergent problems with many possible solutions. One challenge was to design a flotation device that would carry them a half-mile around this lake. Another problem was to design a balsa wood structure that could support 3 bricks. A few of them did. It was from these design classes that a creative problem-solving competition was born. The organization became known as the Odyssey of the Mind. Each year, teams of 5 to 7 students select a long-term problem to solve. An emphasis is placed on using the team's collective imaginations. The competitions begin at local levels. Teams advance to regional, state, and provincial competitions. Each championship team is invited to participate in the Odyssey of the Mind World Finals.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if the spirit of this conference, of this group, if these kids grew up to be with the same kind of adults that they are children? I mean, what would we worry about then? We'd have nothing to concern ourselves about except trying to do and explore and to have fun.
One of our first problems was to design and build a balsa wood structure that weighed only 18 grams, about as much as a half a dozen paper clips. Now see how much weight it could support. That was in 1979. The best structures held a few hundred pounds. Today, structures often hold over 1,000 pounds.
Now is the time your troubles have found you. You must decide who you are. That's we.
The types of problems vary. Some are performances that require teams to create their own original scripts, props, and special effects.
What a ride! I'm getting too old for this.
Some of the problems emphasize technical creativity. Vehicle problems are one of the team's favorites. Sometimes they're small, and sometimes they're ride-on vehicles. Each year, the problems change. All problems allow a place for people with artistic talent. The way that young people solve problems always amazes me. I have ideas how I would do it, but the kids do it differently, and usually better. Writing problems for these competitions is a never-ending process. Every day I look for ideas that can lead to new problems for people to solve. Some people find they're more creative at certain times of the day, the week, or month. Many people have special places that stimulate their thinking. Here's one of mine. This place is called Fazio's Building Materials in southern New Jersey. It's a very unique place. There should be a sign outside that says, if we don't have it, you don't need it. I think if a ship were sunk, we'd have the wherewithal to float the thing again. I think we could find anything here. Most people come in to buy tools, machines, or parts of things that some people may call junk. I come in here to browse and look for things to stimulate ideas for problems that I can present to young people. Wire by the pound, motors of all kinds, and many things I have no idea of their use. I look at them, buy some, and take them back to the office and play with them. Maybe an idea will click. This is some kind of wire, a protective wire cable assembly. What could this be used for? Some of the answers we may get might seem absurd. It may be used as a musical instrument. or a whip for a mechanical bull, perhaps part of a medieval coat of armor. How can we use this piece of wire? Maybe one of the first things we could look at is that it's 3 wires and an insulation cover. Older people tend to keep things intact. They often wouldn't break the traditional way of thinking. They usually wouldn't destroy something or take it apart. Hydraulic jacks are terrific. They're really a neat little item. It took me a couple of years to relate this to an Odyssey of the Mind long-term problem. Take a simple, inexpensive hydraulic jack, pump it, make this piston rise. What can we make that do? You have an enormous amount of power. Can we make a vehicle run by it? We challenge people to build a vehicle that will be powered by a hydraulic jack. Later, a new problem required teams to use mechanical jacks to propel their vehicles. Speed was not a factor. Building a fast vehicle would be a self-imposed limitation. We didn't ask kids to race their vehicle. We asked them to design, build, and drive a vehicle. Another problem required teams to design and drive a battery-powered lightweight vehicle around a set course. Some weighed only 12.5 pounds. A ball bearing is really a beautiful item. In fact, it's part of the Museum of Modern Art's design collection. It's really a fantastic piece of equipment. It's used to reduce friction, so one might use it as part of a vehicle, machine, or appliance. On the day of an Odyssey of the Mind competition, teams are given spontaneous problems. As a spontaneous problem, teams may be asked to improvise with it. Or we may ask what are different ways to reduce friction. Common responses would include lubricants, such as graphite, oil, or wax. A more creative response to reduce friction would be a mediator between a union and management negotiating team. Let's look at a spontaneous problem. What could this be?
Hand mirror, bracelet, slide, picture, finger, elbow, chair.
The Odyssey of the Mind kids have to work as a team. In today's world, it seems that very few people work alone. From building a house to performing surgery, solving most problems requires a team effort. Teaching kids to work together is a big step. When we present our problems, we allow the kids to solve them any way they want. It's a non-traditional way of teaching. We do recognize that some limitations are needed, such as doing all of the work themselves while keeping within certain problem requirements. It's important to encourage kids to think creatively. However, we must be sure this is done in a disciplined manner. Fortunately, there are a lot of teachers who encourage creative thinking and try to reward it. There are also people who say curiosity killed the cat. What does that mean to a little kid? What does that mean to children who are inquisitive? That they be reprimanded for asking questions? We have to encourage kids to learn and follow their interests. For example, someone might say, stop playing with your paint set and do your homework. Well, that implies that one is play and one is work. Maybe the kid is working very, very hard with that paint set. Wouldn't it be a cute but sad cartoon where a youngster says, okay, yes, I'll put away my paint set and do my homework, and then little Leonardo da Vinci closes his paint box and does his homework. By practicing solving both large and small problems, the creative process can be transferred to new and unfamiliar situations. That is the academic purpose of creative problem solving. Thousands of OM coaches have told me that they have observed team members learning to be creative and applying their creativity to problem solving. The Odyssey of the Mind promotes creativity through competition. Competition is good. The struggle of competition builds character. It's stimulating, fun, and can yield world-class results. Don't wait for someone to tell you that you can or can't do something. No one told Marv that he could sail around the world, yet he did. Certainly no one told Paul that he could or couldn't fly. The obvious advice would have been that he couldn't. Both men were creative through competition. Paul tried to win the Kramer Prize. Marv competed with himself. I hope this program inspires your creative spirit. As we have seen, there's creativity all around us. What an untapped resource we have in our senior citizens. And if you're a parent or a teacher, just look at the young people around you. They have the most potential to solve problems and ensure our planet's bright future. We are all part of a great common experience as we continue to take our odysseys of the mind. I'm Sam Nicholas.